Even though I'd accepted Christ when I was 13, I'd gotten caught up in the idea that as long as I did the right things and performed in the right way, then that love would be there. But if I didn't, then it would disappear. When I found out I was pregnant, I was the summer following my senior year in college. The very first thing I thought of was, God got me. I knew all along that my behavior was outside of His will, and I was terrified, absolutely terrified of anyone knowing. And so I didn't tell either of my parents, and I began on the journey of leaning on my own understanding and going my own way. And I was at Emory University, and a doctor at the hospital performed my abortion. I just remember following that abortion that not only did my child die, but a part of me died. And I got up and I walked out of that hospital, and I thought to myself, I will never ever think about this again. I began to just try to numb. I was living a double life. I was excelling in school, and then I was involved in drugs and a promiscuous lifestyle. I really didn't care whether I lived or died. Even though I saw my family, there was no more connection. I think they knew that something must have happened, but I just couldn't connect with people any longer. I continued to date the father of the child. The reason, I think, is that he felt guilty, and I felt guilty, and I felt like no one will ever have me anyway. But then after 7 years, I finally broke it off, and my husband of today got in touch with me, who I'd known when I was in high school and my first 2 years in college, and we began to date long distance. I ended up moving to Florida, where he was, and we got married. I thought, okay, now I can move on with my life. I can set this aside and begin again. But my husband wasn't the answer, even as wonderful as he's been all these years. So we married, and we moved from Florida to Dallas, Texas. I was so filled with self-hatred. I would even at times, my husband couldn't believe it, but I would just say the most horrible things to myself. I'm worthless. No one would ever love me. God could never use me. God doesn't even like me. He may love me because He has to, but He does not like me. I remember being in the kitchen, and this precious little boy comes in and said, Mommy, why do you hate your birthday? And why do you always cry on your birthday? And why won't you let us give you presents? And he did come in on my birthday and ask me about that. I don't think I showed any emotion with him whatsoever. I had no answer for him, because at that point I couldn't even remember that I'd had my abortion on my birthday. I had so locked it away. It did hit me that I didn't care if I was not happy or my life wasn't as full as I would like for it to be. But for my child to carry the heartache of a decision that I made, that wasn't going to work. I just couldn't bear that. So when my son left the kitchen, I fell on my knees and I said, Lord, I've tried so many ways to fix this, and you tell me this time, and I will do it exactly as you instruct. And the very next day, I was driving in the car and I was changing the radio station, and there was a 15-second blip on the radio of the very first class for post-abortion restoration and healing. And so I called that number, and I went to the class, and during that time, I began to understand who God really was and who I was in Christ, that there was nothing I could do that would make Him stop loving me, and there was nothing I could do to make Him love me anymore, because it all rested in His Son, Jesus. And as I began that journey of discovering Him, I was finally able to bring this terrible shame and heartache and lay it at the foot of the cross and be lifted up to walk away in forgiveness and freedom. This was something that I wanted to keep a secret. I didn't want anyone to know about it. My silence was a curse to my kids. My living in the darkness and the shame was a curse to my children. But as I began to come into the light and I began to share my story with them, God, in healing me and blessing me, began to pour that blessing into their lives. You can live in shame. Shame is something that Satan uses to make us define ourselves by our sin. God can use guilt to lead us to the cross. And rather than being defined by our sin, we are then defined by our Savior. And everybody's looking for that. He wants us to walk in truth and grace. And that can only happen when our hearts are filled with His perfect love that casts out all shame and that casts out all fear.